In the meantime, I'll introduce myself briefly. So my name is Lauren Haberstock. I am the Drescher Graduate Campus Librarian, and I have the honor of working with the Business School, the Graduate School of Education and Psychology, as well as the School of Public Policy. And it's been a pleasure to work with Maria Brahma and Hector Lujan, who are both my wonderful colleagues, to develop this Research Foundations series. It's been a lot of fun to think about what sort of resources we can present to really help set you all up for success in your research. And we hope that this has been helpful. And if you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear from you all about what you want to see in the future, what's been helpful, what maybe hasn't been so helpful, because we hope to do more sessions and really respond to your needs. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Today, we're talking about ICPSR, which is a data repository, and ICPSR stands for the Interuniversity Consortium for Political and Social Science Research. So really, it's a data archive of thousands of studies and research files that have been, I guess, developed in the course of somebody conducting a quantitative or qualitative study, or sending out a survey, and that data from the survey is then deposited in ICPSR. So I just wanted to provide a little primer on what it is before we jump in, so you have some context, but I'll be sharing as we go along too, so I don't want to overwhelm you too much at the beginning. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to share my screen, we're going to navigate to the database together, and then I want to kind of touch on some highlights and what I think might be interesting for you all to know. And if you want to follow along, I'm starting at the library homepage, which is library.pepperdine.edu. All right, so hopefully you all can see my shared screen. You can see the beautiful library that we are not currently at, but on our library homepage, you'll see we have our Search Libraries collection bar, but then I'm going to be starting at our databases and e-journals, which is that magnifying glass icon. And here, it's a list of all of our electronic resources and databases. And since I know exactly what I'm looking for, I'm going to go ahead and click on I for ICPSR. And we are looking for ICPSR Direct. So you can just double check that, yep, this is an Interuniversity Consortium. And we'll go ahead and click, and I'm already logged in to my WaveNet, or through my WaveNet credentials, and so I wasn't prompted to enter them, but if it's your first time, you're logging into a database for the first time of the day, you will be prompted to do that. I did want to show you this. This warning pops up anytime you're accessing ICPSR off campus or remotely, just because we work with ICPSR using a proxy address. And so the easiest way that I found to just kind of not have issues come up is just to close it out. So it's that little box in the upper right-hand corner. I've tried working with ICPSR to try to, finesse this, make it better. But if you're accessing it off campus or not on Pepperdine Wi-Fi, that's what comes up, and feel free to close out. So the first time you logged in, I would suggest that you create an account. This is your My Data account that will be kind of your access portal into ICPSR data. There is data that is accessible for everyone, so you don't have to create an account to access certain data, but there is specialized data sets that are only accessible to member institutions. So Pepperdine University is a member of ICPSR, so we have access to everything. So I'd really encourage you to create an account. It'll just make sure that you don't run into any sort of restrictions as you're going through. So I already have my account. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And when you log in, you'll see this Manage My Account page. And I would say the best place to start, where I always start, is this Find Data heading right here. So it's under the big ICPSR heading. You can head straight to Find Data. This is where I wanted to start the journey, if you will, of ICPSR. I really enjoy this data dashboard or this dashboard, this entry into it, because you can see what people have been looking at. You can see the most popular search terms. Right now, you can see the COVID, depression, crime, race. So those are the trending topics, and people are looking for data on those topics, which isn't too surprising. But you can see that there's studies in here. So those are the data sets that are actually generated as a result of a study. And then you have variables and then publications. So I'm going to talk through kind of each of these as we go along. But those are just some of their key stats. You can see what countries are using ICPSR data, as well as the most downloaded data sets. If you're just curious to know what people are looking at, you can take a look at the most downloaded data sets. And this database can be a little overwhelming at first. I've definitely found that it's taken some just browsing and serendipitous discovery to really start to understand it. And so if you're not quite sure where to start, I'd recommend checking out some of these browse functions. ICPSR has tried to kind of highlight different topical areas or different survey series. And so this is a way to approach the data, I would say, in a way that maybe makes a little bit more sense depending on what you're looking for. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you the topics section, which is a great way when you're like, okay, I want to find a data set and I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking for, but I know generally the topical area that I'm thinking about. And they have come up with these different topic classifications just as a way to start exploring the data to see what's out there. So they have everything from economic behaviors and attitudes to elites and leadership, legal systems. These are topic classifications that they've come up with based on what they have in their data repository. So they're not all encompassing or comprehensive, but this is what they've come up with based on the data that's been deposited here. So for example, if you're thinking about the topic of education, you could go ahead and click on their topical classification, and we're pulling in about 65 data sets based on kind of how they've gone through the data that's here and how they've kind of classified, like, oh, this is under the topic of education. So this is one way at getting at the data. And I want to show you the other browse function before I kind of jump into some keyword searches, because that is a possibility as well. And then I also want to talk a little bit about some of the filtration methods. So under browse as well, you can look at different series. So these series are different survey instruments that are conducted kind of on a routine basis. So the first one that jumps out to me is this American Community Survey, which is conducted by the US Census Bureau in the intervening period of time between the decennial census. So these are survey instruments that kind of occur again and again and again. So it's great, especially if you need to compare data across different years. So for example, I'll just go ahead and click on the American Community Survey series to show you what this might look like. But if you have like a specific survey series that you're interested in, they've organized it alphabetically so you can see what they have there within their depository. So you can check the years. So we're starting in 1996. We almost have a comprehensive list up until 2009. And then they have a little bit of the public use microdata sample from 2005 to 2007 in here as well. So like I said, it's not, I wouldn't say it's an all comprehensive database of different data sets, but they do have a lot here. So they've pulled a lot here. People have deposited a lot here. So it's a great place if you're looking for data to find it in one spot rather than needing to go to all the different government websites or all the different databases. You can find your data here. I'm going to go back to find data and talk a little bit about how you can keyword search and some of the filtration methods. And fortunately, within ICPSR, there's some really robust filtration methods that I find to be just helpful and as you're narrowing down. So you could throw in some keywords for anything. They have their search tips that may be about how to be the most successful researcher in using their specific search engine. But if I was, let's say I'm interested in early childhood education, I'm gonna go ahead and just type that in as my keywords. And I can see that I'm pulling about 1,600 data sets. That's a lot of data to be pulling back. So they have these subject terms that you can always filter by. You can also filter by geography. So if you're looking maybe more globally, or you're looking maybe generally at the United States or a specific state or city, you can often narrow by that. And if you don't see what you're looking for right here, you can always click on View All and see what other options there are. You can also limit by data format, which might be helpful depending on what format you want your data in. So if you're working with SPSS or R, you can determine, okay, I only want to be looking at R data sets. That is totally fine. You can do that. I do want to mention that there is the possibility for online analysis of some of these data sets. So this means that you can actually analyze the data within ICPSR within your web browser, so that you don't have to have this specialty software to run SPSS, say. So that can be helpful if you're in a spot where you're like, oh, I don't have my SPSS up, or I don't have it downloaded. You can look for these online analysis surveys, just to make sure that you can do your analysis kind of on your browser and don't need anything special. There's all these other features that you can add. So if you're looking at a specific time period, you could filter by your time period. You could also filter by your funding agency as well. So if you're particularly interested in seeing who's funding what research, this could be a great way to see, for example, what the DOJ Office of Justice Programs, Bureau of Justice Statistics, seeing what they're funding and the research that's come out of that. That would be one way to get at the data. But then you can also look at the investigator as well as an investigator affiliation. So if there's a particular institution that you know is working on particular kinds of research, and you're curious to see what they're doing, you can look for the investigator affiliation. So for example, Harvard Medical School comes up here. If you're thinking about, oh, Johns Hopkins has some interesting research in a particular area, I want to see what they have. And you can get as granular as the specific investigator as well. So just for fun, I wanted to see if anyone from Pepperdine had deposited their data here in ICPSR. So I did just a general view all of the data sets. So I was like, okay, let's see what all the data sets are in here. You can see we're getting over 15,000 data sets, which, whew, that's a tremendous amount of data. But then if I wanted to go and see, okay, did somebody from Pepperdine deposit any data here, I can go to the investigator and view all, and then select the letter P for Pepperdine. And, oh, I'm so sorry, I did that wrong. I need to do investigator affiliation. All right, we're gonna try again. All right, investigator affiliation, we're looking for Pepperdine. Thank you for bearing with me. All right. Let's make sure I can spell. There it is. There is one professor, Angela Hawkins. She's actually since moved on from Pepperdine, but she actually conducted a study and then deposited her data here in ICPSR while she was affiliated with Pepperdine. So it's pretty fun to see, and I'll actually use this as our kind of entry point into looking at what you might see as you're looking at a data set. So as we are looking at this data set, we'll get an idea of how many times it's been downloaded. This is the past 3 years, so getting an idea of the usage. as well as the data related publications. And that's also included as a tab here. So I'll get to this later, but this is a great way to track citations. So if you find a study that you're like, this is really fascinating, I want to see where the scholarly conversation has gone since the publication of this data set, you can actually see what publications have drawn on this data and kind of follow the conversation and see where it's gone since the study was conducted. So I'll get a little bit more into that, but you'll see the project description, get a summary of what the goal of the study was, some citation information for those of you who joined us in our RefWorks session. You can download an RIS file and then upload it directly into RefWorks. So another great way to manage your citations. And then you'll get some ideas of the related subject terms, which can be helpful if you're maybe conducting a literature search or you're trying to think of related data sets you might want to look for. Taking note of these subject terms can be helpful because it'll help guide you as you're searching. Then there'll be a little bit of information about any possible restrictions that might come up. There are some data sets that are restricted, usually because of personally identifying information. So usually you have to fill out a restricted data use agreement, and usually talk a little bit about your research project, what you intend to use the data for. And if you have any questions or get to that point, please feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to help navigate that process with you. But something that I think is really helpful is looking at the methodology. So actually seeing what the study of the purpose was in the study design. So if you're trying to think about designing your own study, this can be a great place to come and just try to find studies that you think are really fascinating and then dig into their design, how they actually conducted their study, the data that they were able to pull from it, and the ways that they've maybe coded their variables. So it's, for me, I find it to be a great place to get some inspiration as far as design. You can check out and see what their sample was, kind of the universe that they're operating in, as well as a description of the variables that they use within their study. And then I'll mention that, again, you can download in different formats. I saw a question about delimited. I'll need to look into that a little bit closer, but I'll be happy to reach out. This one, because there's restricted data, you're not able to analyze it online, but if you were going to analyze it online, this is where it would come up. And so the next thing I want to do is just point out the data related publications. This is really helpful bibliographic information. So the full text is not stored here in ICPSR, but it'll point you to other publications that have used this data set, that have built on the conversation that began here. And something else that can be helpful, I'm not seeing any here. These are all pulling directly from this study. But oftentimes I've found that as you get more articles or publications coming out from a specific data set, oftentimes there's even additional studies that will pop up as related, or you'll get different studies that are citing multiple data sets or publications citing multiple data sets. So that can help you kind of track your citations as well and do some investigative work to see where else the conversation has gone. And then any special notes that you need to know about will be included in this notes section. So it'll let you know, hey, there are some special restrictions here, or it'll let you know there's no restrictions. Feel free to download, use as you need to for your research. And then the last thing I'll mention, which is going to be a great segue to what I want to show you next, is that this data is included in a thematic data collection called the National Archive of Criminal Justice Data. So ICPSR has worked with some federal institutions as well as different research organizations to curate different thematic data collections around specific topics. So you can see they worked with the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice to to create a data archive around the topic of criminal justice. And you can get to these thematic data collections from this tab here, labeled thematic data collections. And these link out to specific websites that are still hosted by ICPSR, but that are specific to that data collection. So for example, let's say you're interested in child and family data. You can go ahead and click on it, and you'll notice up in the URL that the URL has changed. This is a separate website for this data collection, but there are linkages between the two, and it is still maintained by ICPSR. Something that I find really unique about some of these data collections is actually highlighted on the bottom. So the data sets actually in this family and child data archive are available for free through funding. And so some of these data sets and these data collections are actually openly accessible, even if you're not a member institution. So this is really a great, for me, I think in support of open data and sharing information, I'm excited about this, that people can actually come and get this data, and there's no paywall that they encounter. So much like the search feature on ICPSR, we could either go to find data. It's a very similar kind of landing page, or you could type your keywords in here. So if I was curious about early childhood education, I could search in their main search bar or under find data. And then the results page is very, very similar because it's supported by ICPSR. So fortunately, you're not seeing anything too new. So once you kind of start to understand the look of it, the different filtration methods, it's consistent across the different data collections. And this is just another way of getting at the data. So there's multiple entry points. I know for me personally, it's taken a bit of time. There's a little bit of a learning curve involved here, but I'm here to help and answer any questions. And I'm gonna head back to ICPSR. There's one last thing that I want to show you. ICPSR, as part of their mission, really tried to do a lot with learning and informing about data collection, data curation, data management. So if you ever have any questions specifically around data management and curation, they have some really great resources. But then there's also some great resources under teaching and learning. And I'll highlight specifically some of the resources that they have for students. And under learning support, this article here called How to Read a Journal article has, I mean, I won't say it's changed my life, but it's definitely changed the way that I approach social science journal articles and journal articles in general, especially when I'm conducting a literature review. It really walks you through the process of moving through the literature well and making sure you're pulling out the information you need and how to read and think strategically. So I would really encourage you to check that out. There's some learning support materials on citing data and data management plans. If you get to the point of you're conducting your research project or you're applying for funding and they require that you have a data management plan, this is a great place to start and just get some insight and wisdom into that process. And then if you ever use ICPSR data within a paper, they have an annual competition that's open to both undergraduate and graduate students, as well as recent graduates. So this is really kind of exciting that they do kind of recognize the wonderful research that comes out of people using their data. And then their YouTube channel is pretty wonderful as far as addressing specific elements of what you might come across, whether it's analyzing the data online or working with SPSS or Stata. There's some great webinars, some shorter videos, and I found it invaluable as I'm working with ICPSR to kind of check out their YouTube channel, see what they've created. And that's really what I wanted to show you. I know that was probably a lot to throw at you, so I wanted to open it to any questions that you all might have that might have come up while I was talking and showing ICPSR.
Yes, hi. This is Rocco.
Hi.
Let's see, I looked at the database a couple weeks ago. It's huge. It's just enormous.
Yeah, there's so much in there.
Right. And so I was actually looking for data. So it's easy to find studies and then finding studies with data that's attached. So it seemed like after about 3 or 4 hours, I only found a couple that actually had data. So maybe it's a search filter thing, that I was doing wrong with the search.
Yeah,
And so,
I would be happy. Feel free to reach out to me.
yeah, I'll
Yeah,
do that.
offline. Let me stick my email into the chat, and yeah, I'd be
Okay,
happy to see
great. Thanks.
what I can help you with. Definitely. Yeah, and then Rocco, sorry, follow-up question. Have you created a My Data account?
I did at the
Okay.
time, yeah. Or,
Okay.
to be honest with you, I can't remember I did that or how I did it. If I used the proxy, I can't recall.
Perfect. We'll connect offline. Yeah,
Okay,
great
thank you.
question. Of course. All right. We have a few minutes left. Are there any other questions or other things you'd all like to explore or do? I'm happy to stick around. If you need to pop off, feel free to. I'll keep the recording going if you need to jump off. But yeah, are there any other questions?
I was just wondering what you recommend. Let's say someone doesn't have a strong stats background. Which of the download formats do you think might be the most accessible to someone who's not really well versed in stats packages?
That's a great question. I I would say there's probably a lot more support resources for students around SPSS, just because that's often used in the academic setting. So I would say, especially, that's probably what professors are going to be maybe a little bit more versed in, and I think there's going to be more support available through an SPSS file package.
Okay, thank you.
Also, a number of the schools have licenses for SPSS, so it's available.
Lauren, I have a question. This is Heather.
Yeah, of course. Hi, Heather.
So all of these data sets are available to us to use without getting some special permission or something like that. If we find it here, it's okay.
Yes, that's where the restricted use comes in. So there are a few that are restricted use where you would need to get permission to use the data, and it's not going to be available to just download. It'll let you know that you need to fill out a requested use form, and essentially it's just usually there's personally identifying information, and there is a way to filter on this side. Let me pull it up real quick. Actually, there's a way to see whether it's public use or restricted use so that you don't, so you can tell if you're like, hey, I don't want to run into any restricted use
Sure.
data. You can just go ahead and do that. Let me share my screen again.
And then maybe while you click to that, and there's not an additional fee, it would just be permission wise, not monetary wise.
Yeah, it would just be permission wise. So here, I'm looking at all their data sets. So their public use data sets, they have almost 13,000. So there's percentage wise not as many that are restricted use. So you should hopefully be able to find plenty that are public use. And I'm not seeing, oh, there we go. Here's a great example. This is something I wanted to mention that I didn't before. But anytime you see this open ICPSR, this means that ICPSR has made this openly available data for anyone. So anybody who's not affiliated with a member institution, they're just cruising on the ICPSR website, they would actually be able to view and download this data set as well. So if you see that, that's what that means. It just means that it's openly accessible data.